You're walking down a hallway at night. Behind you, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. You turn, but no one's there. Your heart races. Your breath quickens. You feel fear. But the figure in the shadows feels something else entirely. Pleasure. There are people who aren't just indifferent to the suffering of others. They're drawn to it. Not just emotionally disconnected, but thrilled by it. They might smile at pain, laugh at fear, and feel powerful in the presence of vulnerability. These individuals aren't necessarily serial killers or movie villains. Some are coworkers, lovers, internet trolls, or even seemingly ordinary people with a dark craving they keep expertly hidden. This episode isn't about monsters, it's about humans. Because sadism, the enjoyment of inflicting pain, isn't as rare as we'd like to believe. So the real question isn't just, why do some people enjoy causing pain? It's, what does it say about us that some people do? We're going deep into the mind of the sadist, from the rush of power to the broken roots beneath. You'll learn how cruelty can become addictive, how it manifests in everyday life, and why some people don't just cross the line, they seek it out. This is not fiction, this is dark psychology, and once you understand sadism, you'll never look at people the same way again. If you want more deep dives into the minds of the most complex and disturbing human behaviors, make sure you follow this channel now. That way, you won't miss the next episode that takes you even further into the dark corners of psychology. Sadism. The word conjures images of medieval torture chambers, brutal dictators, and the darkest corners of the human psyche. But behind the sensationalism lies a psychological reality that is far more complex and far more common than most people realize. At its core, sadism is the experience of pleasure, emotional, psychological, or even sexual, through inflicting pain, suffering, or humiliation on others. That pleasure doesn't have to be dramatic or overt. It can be subtle, disguised as sarcasm, manipulation, or calculated cruelty. And it doesn't always involve violence. In clinical psychology, sadism has been explored in multiple forms. Sexual sadism disorder, recognized in the DSM-5, involves sexual arousal from causing pain or humiliation, but only when it's non-consensual or causes distress to others. Everyday sadism, a more recent concept, refers to a low-level but persistent enjoyment of others' discomfort, often found in bullies, trolls, or domineering personalities. And then there's sadistic personality disorder, a diagnosis that once existed but was removed from official manuals, not because it didn't exist, but because it was difficult to isolate and diagnose clearly. What separates sadism from mere aggression or cruelty is intention. A sadist doesn't just lash out. They want the victim to suffer. The suffering is the reward. Cruelty can be impulsive, but sadism is calculated. Importantly, not all sadists are violent. Not all enjoy physical pain. Some derive satisfaction from psychological domination, humiliation, or emotional control. It's about power and the twisted satisfaction that comes from holding it over someone else. So while the word sadist might sound extreme, its reality can wear many masks. Behind a charming smile, a helpful coworker, or a partner's subtle threats, there may lie something much darker, something not easily seen but deeply felt. What goes on in the mind of someone who enjoys hurting others? Thanks to advances in neuroscience and psychology, we can now begin to map the sadist's inner world, not just through behavior, but through the architecture of the brain itself. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that people with high sadistic traits often exhibit heightened activity in the reward centers of the brain, particularly the nucleus accumbens, a region commonly associated with pleasure, addiction, and reinforcement. In other words, for sadists, causing pain may feel like a hit of dopamine. One study even asked participants to administer what they believed were real shocks to others. Those who ranked higher in sadistic traits not only chose to continue inflicting the shocks, they smiled while doing it, and their brain scans revealed stronger reward responses than those with lower sadistic tendencies. Sadism, in many cases, overlaps with the so-called Dark Tetrad of personality traits: narcissism, the desire for admiration and superiority; Machiavellianism, manipulativeness and strategic cruelty; psychopathy, lack of empathy and remorse; and sadism itself, pleasure from others' pain. These traits aren't just moral flaws, they're tied to neurological patterns that dull emotional empathy while amplifying sensations of control and gratification. To a sadist, your suffering isn't just something they ignore, it's something they feel. But this isn't always conscious. Many sadists don't see themselves as villains. In their mind, they're strong, they're assertive, they're justified. And the pain they cause? Just collateral damage in a world they believe rewards dominance. Understanding this isn't about sympathy, it's about seeing the mechanisms behind the mask and recognizing the unsettling truth. Sometimes the human brain is wired to enjoy cruelty. Sadists aren't born with blood on their hands. The capacity for cruelty, especially pleasurable cruelty, often takes root long before it's ever acted upon. But where does it begin? Psychologists point to a mix of nature and nurture, a dangerous intersection between biology, early environment, and learned behavior. One key factor is early childhood trauma. Repeated exposure to violence, neglect, or emotional abuse can distort a child's sense of empathy and emotional regulation. If a child learns that power equals safety, they may come to associate control over others with security and, eventually, satisfaction. Some sadists were once victims themselves, who learned to survive by flipping the script. There's also evidence of attachment disruptions. Children raised without consistent affection or attunement from caregivers may struggle to form healthy emotional bonds. This lack of connection can evolve into emotional detachment, where others are seen not as people, but as tools, obstacles, or targets. And then there's modeling. When children witness sadistic behavior, whether from abusive parents, violent peers, or even glorified media, they may begin to mirror it. Over time, cruelty becomes normalized. Repetition makes it feel right. Biological predispositions also play a role. Some individuals may be born with lower baseline empathy or a naturally more aggressive temperament. When combined with toxic environments, this creates the perfect storm. Emotional coldness meets psychological reinforcement. But not all sadists come from violent homes. Some emerge from privilege, neglect, or emotional isolation, proof that sadism isn't always born from chaos. Sometimes it grows in silence. Sadism isn't just about what someone does, it's about what shaped them before they ever chose to do it. And once that pathway is formed, the rush of power and pleasure can become something far more dangerous. Addictive. When we hear the word sadist, it's easy to imagine a violent criminal or a depraved torturer. But in reality, sadism exists on a spectrum. and its manifestations range from the obvious to the disturbingly subtle. At one extreme, there are clinical sadists, individuals who derive intense, often sexual pleasure from causing physical or psychological harm. In its most dangerous form, this includes sexual sadism disorder, where arousal depends on the non-consensual suffering of another. These individuals may be violent offenders, serial abusers, or those who blur fantasy with real harm. But not all sadists are violent. Some exhibit what psychologists call everyday sadism, a low-level but persistent enjoyment of watching others struggle, fail, or suffer. These people may not commit crimes, but they'll laugh at pain, revel in humiliation, or go out of their way to provoke distress. Think of the online troll, the passive-aggressive coworker, the schoolyard bully who never grew up. There are also covert sadists, those who manipulate, undermine, or humiliate others in private, often under the guise of charm or concern. Their cruelty is quiet but calculated. And then there's consensual sadism, seen in BDSM contexts, where pain, dominance, and control are explored with mutual agreement, respect, and safety. These individuals may enjoy causing discomfort, but they're not pathological. The difference is simple: consent. Sadism isn't one thing, it's many masks. Understanding these shades helps us identify the real danger, not just in the overtly cruel, but in those whose pleasure in others' pain hides behind a smile. Why would anyone enjoy hurting someone else? The answer lies in 3 words: power, control, and pleasure. For the sadist, inflicting pain isn't just an action, it's an experience, and that experience triggers a potent psychological cocktail. At the center is control. Causing pain, whether physical or emotional, creates an immediate power imbalance. The sadist becomes the dominant force. They decide when the suffering begins, how far it goes, and when it ends. That dominance produces a rush, a sense of invincibility that can feel intoxicating. Then there's the emotional high. When sadists harm others, their brains may release dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and pleasure. This means pain isn't just satisfying, it's chemically reinforced. Over time, the act can become addictive. Many sadists also report a sense of emotional detachment during acts of cruelty. Some don't feel guilt, others feel nothing at all. This numbness, combined with control, gives them the ability to dehumanize their victims, making it easier to repeat the behavior. Interestingly, sadistic pleasure isn't always about rage. It can come from a cold, calculated place, like a game of psychological chess. The goal isn't destruction, it's domination. To a sadist, pain is more than suffering. It's proof that they have the upper hand, that they matter, that they're powerful, and that feeling for them is worth everything. Sadists aren't always lurking in shadows or locked away in prison cells. Many of them walk among us, unnoticed, unchallenged, and sometimes even rewarded. These are the everyday sadists, people who get pleasure from low-level cruelty and often blend seamlessly into society. They don't wear a mask of horror, they wear a smile. They joke at others' expense. They enjoy pushing buttons, watching someone squirm, or delivering a cutting remark just to see how deep it lands. Think of the manager who humiliates employees in front of others, the online troll who delights in emotional breakdowns, or the partner who withholds affection only to watch you beg for it. These individuals don't always break laws, but they break spirits. Psychologists describe this behavior as part of the Dark Tetrad, alongside narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Everyday sadists typically score high in callousness, low empathy, and a willingness to exploit others for entertainment. The suffering they cause might be subtle, but it's not accidental. It's intentional. Even more disturbing, in certain environments, everyday sadism is encouraged. Competitive workplaces, power-hungry social circles, and anonymous online spaces all provide safe havens for cruelty. Some people don't just tolerate sadists, they promote them. The truth is, sadism doesn't need a dungeon, it needs an audience. And in a world that rewards dominance, sadists often rise, while their victims stay silent. Everyday sadists don't hide in the dark, they thrive in plain sight. Sadistic thoughts aren't uncommon. Fantasies of control, revenge, or dominance can flicker through the human mind, especially under stress, anger, or humiliation. But for most people, these thoughts remain exactly that, fantasies. For sadists, however, the boundary between imagination and action can begin to erode. Psychologists refer to this as behavioral disinhibition, the weakening of the psychological brakes that normally stop us from harming others. When sadistic fantasies are fed over time, through violent media, repeated mental rehearsal, or permissive social environments, they can become normalized and eventually acted upon. It might start small, a manipulative lie, a cruel prank, a calculated humiliation. But for some, these actions escalate. The fantasy begins to demand more intensity, more realness, more pain, and the line between thought and behavior quietly vanishes. This is when sadism becomes truly dangerous, when hurting others isn't just desired, but necessary to feel something. The most terrifying sadists aren't the ones lost in fantasy. They're the ones who bring fantasy to life, and once that line is crossed, it rarely goes back. Not all who enjoy giving pain are sadists in the psychological sense. In fact, there's a critical difference between pathological sadism and consensual play, consent, communication, and control. In the world of BDSM, bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism, sadistic acts are carefully negotiated, mutual, and rooted in trust. Both partners agree to the experience. They set boundaries, establish safe words, and prioritize emotional safety just as much as physical safety. In this context, the one inflicting pain isn't doing so to dominate in a harmful way, but to create intense, consensual experiences of surrender, vulnerability, and connection. It's not about humiliation. It's about intimacy through controlled power dynamics. Compare this to clinical sadism or everyday sadistic behavior, where pleasure comes from genuine suffering, lack of control, and non-consensual harm. In these cases, the sadist doesn't want permission, they want power. BDSM is about trust. Pathological sadism is about violation. The confusion between the two often leads to harmful stereotypes. But the truth is, one is a psychological disorder, the other is a consensual, often therapeutic form of expression. Pain in itself isn't the problem, it's what you do with it, and why, that matters. Can someone who finds pleasure in the pain of others truly change? The answer is complicated and unsettling. Sadistic tendencies, especially when deeply rooted in personality disorders like psychopathy or narcissism, are extremely resistant to change. These individuals often lack remorse, resist introspection, and rarely seek help unless forced by legal or social consequences. Even then, therapy outcomes are limited. That said, not all sadists are unreachable. In cases where sadism stems from trauma, emotional detachment, or learned behavior, not full-blown pathology, intervention can help. Cognitive behavioral therapy, empathy training, and trauma-focused approaches may reduce harmful impulses over time. But there's a catch. Sadists have to want to change, and many don't. You can't force empathy into someone who feels powerful without it. So can they change? Sometimes, but more often than not, they don't. Some sadists stay in the shadows, content with manipulation and low-level cruelty. Others, however, spiral into something far more terrifying: lethal obsession. When sadism crosses the threshold into violence, the results can be unspeakable. Take David Parker Ray, known as the Toy Box Killer. He built a custom torture chamber in his New Mexico home, complete with surgical tools, whips, and a chilling audio tape he played for his victims. Ray didn't just want to kill, he wanted to prolong pain. To him, suffering was a form of art. Or Issei Sagawa, the Japanese student who murdered and cannibalized a classmate in Paris. What shocked psychologists wasn't just the act, but his lack of remorse. He spoke openly of his pleasure, his fantasies, and how fulfilled he felt afterward. There's also the case of Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, a Canadian couple whose sadistic partnership led to the rape and murder of multiple young women, including Carla's own sister. Their crimes weren't impulsive. They were planned, filmed, and fueled by mutual sadistic desire. These are extreme cases, but they reveal something crucial. For some sadists, pain is more than a thrill. It's a need. These killers didn't just want control. They wanted complete surrender. They wanted to see fear, to hear screams, and to feel powerful in the most horrific way imaginable. Sadism, when left unchecked, doesn't always stay psychological. Sometimes it turns fatal. Sadism isn't just a fringe pathology. It's a mirror, reflecting something deeply uncomfortable about human nature: our capacity for cruelty. Most people will never torture, manipulate, or kill, but many have felt the flicker of satisfaction at someone else's failure, the temptation to dominate, even subtly. The sadist simply steps further into the darkness. Understanding sadism isn't about justifying it. It's about recognizing how thin the line is between power and perversion, between authority and abuse. Because when empathy fails and pleasure is found in pain, what's left of our humanity? We've seen what happens when cruelty itself becomes the goal, when pain is not just inflicted, but enjoyed. But what happens when that hunger for suffering joins forces with ego, manipulation, and a conscience that feels nothing? In our final episode, we bring all four traits together and reveal the full shape of human evil. This is the Dark Tetrad,